we're getting new video of Ukraine taking out a devastating weapon that Putin has been using to inflict mass casualties on the front lines. You've heard about the thermobaric weapons from day one, but here you see Ukraine targeting a Russian multiple rocket launcher system that is equipped with those thermobaric weapons. And we've talked about them from the beginning of the war because they're horrific. They're banned under the Geneva Convention for a reason. They suck the oxygen out of an area. So if there is one that detonates, it literally rips the oxygen out of people's lungs and causes it to rupture. It is a horrific way to die. It's banned by the Geneva Convention, and Russia has been using it in Ukraine. So Ukraine taking that one out. And Putin's forces, of course, are suffering major losses on the battlefield. However, he is still fighting, and he is celebrating a big win tonight. Tonight, the government of Switzerland announcing it will not confiscate Russian assets, saying it's unconstitutional to do so. Now, this is a significant development because Russian oligarchs do store massive amounts of money still in Switzerland. The notoriously secret government there even acknowledging up to $48.5 billion of Russian money is in Swiss banks. And just to say this out loud, this isn't the money of everyday Russians. Switzerland is where oligarchs and Putin's inner circle have long played. It's the reported home of Putin's ex-wife, Ludmila, which is nestled there. We've highlighted it at the base of a mountain in Davos, where, of course, the powerful and rich just recently met. And according to the Wall Street Journal, Putin's girlfriend, the Russian Olympic gymnast Alina Kabaeva, has resided in a high-walled mansion near Geneva. Switzerland now still says it's committed to supporting Ukraine. But the reality is that money is what is fueling Putin's major new offensive. It is what will buy and produce more ammunition if they can do it. It is what will fuel an offensive that could may very well include a new front from Belarus. The Financial Times reporting that Western intelligence shows Russian aircraft gathering at the Belarusian border with Ukraine, signaling what could be a major, and they say an imminent, air offensive. Fred Pleiken is out front. He is in Minsk, Belarus tonight. And Fred, you had rare access to the border between Belarus and Ukraine today. This is the border that all eyes around the world are on to see what Putin is really gathering, what's happening there. You were there. What did you see?
Yeah, and so much concern on the Ukrainian side about that border. And, you know, Aaron, I was just on the Ukrainian side of that border a couple of weeks ago, and the Ukrainians really are worried that Putin could use Belarus once again as a launch pad for attacks on Ukrainian territory. So, of course, every chance we have, we need to try and get into that border area. Now, the access that we got today was part of a Belarusian government-organized trip with all the restrictions that entails, but we certainly get some pretty interesting insights. Here's what we saw.
As Russian forces ramp up their assault in eastern Ukraine, Kyiv believes the Kremlin's massive spring offensive may already be well underway. And Russian President Vladimir Putin could again use Belarus as the launching pad for attacks. On a visit organized by the Belarusian government, we saw the Ukrainians aren't taking any chances.
The Belarusians say from their side this border crossing is open, but you can see over there that's Ukrainian territory, and over there that crossing is definitely shut. There's several layers of barbed wire and also earth mounds to make sure no one can get through.
Russia launched its main thrust towards Kyiv through Belarus almost a year ago, penetrating all the way to the gates of Ukraine's capital before its forces were decimated and retreated. Today, the situation at the Belarusian-Ukrainian border remains tense. Although this crossing is usually calm, even here, some trolling. The Ukrainians fly the white, red, white flag of the Belarusian opposition on their side of the border, one of the many provocations the Belarusians say, and they've beefed up their own forces here.
Mainly, border guard units have been expanded. If before it was 2 people, now it's 3 or 5. The armament and equipment were also updated.
Belarus says all the measures they're taking here are purely defensive. But Minsk recently conducted large-scale Air Force drills with the Russian military, and the U.S. believes Russia is amassing aircraft near Ukraine's border. Putin recently hinting he's even considering placing nukes into Belarus.
I consider it possible to continue the implementation of the President of Belarus's proposals on training the crews of combat aircraft of the Army of Belarus, which have been converted for the possible use of air-launched ammunition with a special warhead.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko acknowledging he needs Putin.
Let's be honest. Are we capable alone, without Russia, to defend our sovereignty and independence? We are not.
In the towns near the Belarusian-Ukrainian border, the war next door weighs heavily.
It makes me cry, of course. It is scary. You are afraid for the people there, and of course you want to influence the situation somehow. But I am an ordinary person.
Others fully in Putin's corner. I ask this man if he thinks Belarus should support Russia.
We are one nation with Russia. We absolutely should help them.
For now, all is quiet at the Belarusian-Ukrainian border. A nervous calm folks here hope will hold somehow.
And, you know, Aaron, for the moment, both the Ukrainians and the U.S. believe that the Russians don't have enough ground forces here in Belarus right now to launch a ground offensive. But they also say that missile attacks, for instance, and drone attacks are very much being launched from Belarusian territory towards Ukraine. Now, the next big event that we're going to be looking at is Friday, when Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko is going to be in Russia speaking with Vladimir Putin there. And we'll see then how things move forward and whether or not Belarus will be drawn even deeper into this war. Aaron?
All right, Fred Pleiken, thank you very much. There's that crucial reporting there and on the border, and of course tonight from Minsk. Out front now, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton and Nina Khrushcheva, the great-granddaughter of Nikita Khrushchev, the former premier of the Soviet Union. She is also professor of international affairs at the New School. So thanks very much to both of you. Colonel, let me start with you. So Fred just showing us what's happening in Belarus. And as he's very clear to say, you don't just go to Belarus and film what you want to film, right? I mean, you know, this was a government-allowed tour. But nonetheless, he had eyes on the ground where really no one from the West has eyes on the ground. So how concerned should Ukraine be about what's happening in Belarus and about this amassing, is the word that's being used, of Russian Air Force in Belarus?
Oh, I think they should be very concerned, Aaron. And the reason for that is that Belarus was a launching pad for the initial invasion last year. Right. And when you look at that, you see that this is not going to be a ground movement, it looks like, because there are no really Russian formations that are showing up there on the ground, Russian infantry formations or anything like that. But there are air formations that are showing up. And the way that Putin and Lukashenko have spoken about this, it's very clear that they intend to use Belarusian airspace to launch missiles against the Ukrainians.
So, Nina, you know, when in the context here is, of course, Putin rushing to do this. And we hear, obviously, the Russian state media reporter talking about ammunition shortages. There are issues on the ground, and we're well aware of those. But at home, those Russian mothers that we saw, we've heard complaints, but they were very clear, right? Gathering in a group and very critical of how their children are being treated. Here's a little bit more of what they said. And they did use Putin's name directly. Here's what else they said to him.
Some of the men on the front lines are suffering from fever and wounds. They've neither been seen by doctors nor referred to health specialists when requested to resolve their ongoing health conditions.
I mean, they're going through the detail, you know, saying that their sons only had 2 days on a shooting range to even go there, no medical supplies, they can't come home. Do their words at this point signal anything to you?
Oh, absolutely. And the fact that it's shown on state TV, or the fact that it's being reported by Russian correspondents, the war correspondents, it's very important, because what the government is now doing, what Putin is now doing, is to say, look, we've never been in this position. We haven't done war since 1945, since World War II, and we understand it's difficult. We're trying to change it. We're trying to make it better, but they're not hiding it. And it's very important, because that's how Putin thinks he's going to get ahead of the game, admitting mistakes, saying, yes, it is all horrible, but it's for the good of the nation, and we're trying to fix it. In fact, very loudly and quite often he goes around, or he meets with his officials, and he says, well, now my order is you take care of all the problems. The problems need to be solved. In all the regions, they need to be solved. Right. The governors of the regions go to the front lines and talk to the soldiers. So they try to stay ahead of it in order to say, this is our problem for the whole country, and we are going to be victorious. And then, of course, the complaints still come, right? At some point, there's only so much you can say, oh, I'll help you solve it, when it doesn't resolve. And I guess that's the big question in the context, Colonel, of what that state media correspondent posted today, right? Which is, oh, don't worry, we're going to win Bakhmut, but the Wagner group doesn't have enough artillery.
Right. And if the
artillery, I'm sorry, ammunition. And
right.
by the way, they also have issues with artillery and tanks and other things, but specifically ammunition.
Yeah, that's really their Achilles heel, if you will, Aaron. And when you see that problem, the very fact that they can't supply even their elite, even though it's private in quotation marks, Wagner
right.
Group, that is really going to be a real problem for them. There's only so much papering over that you can do. And, what Nino was saying is this is the perfect way to try to obfuscate what's going on, except if you don't have the resources, no matter what you say, it's going to be a real problem to actually make it real and provide the kinds of things that society needs.